Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening for our next class in Leviticus. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Leviticus chapter 11. We've seen so far the first two sections of Leviticus's structure, and that was the first the first section having to do with rituals, that is the sacrificial system. And then the second section having to do with the priesthood, namely the ordaining of priests, God showing his approval of Aaron and showing his disapproval of a couple of priests who did not respect his holiness. And so now we are on section 3, and this one is a longer one, so we're going to give it 2 class periods because these purity laws, which are a way of God showing Israel how they can live holy, clean, ceremonial, clean lives, it's a big part of Leviticus, and it becomes a big part of the lives of the everyday lives of the Jewish people. So let's get into that. Leviticus 11 has to do with clean and unclean animals. We're going to see it mentioned. We're going to go from animals that you can or cannot eat, then down to laws about quarantine, and then laws about particularly leprosy, which is going to be a very interesting discussion. But we're going to begin with these laws about clean and unclean animals in Leviticus 11. Now, remember that we do not live under these laws anymore. As Paul said, anyone trying to justify themselves by the law is going to find that it is not possible, because no one is justified by the law. He says that in Galatians, and he says that in Romans. However, Romans 14 mentions that if someone abstains from eating a certain thing for the reason of being grateful and doing that unto the Lord, well, more power to them. As long as it's not them trying to justify themselves by the works of the law, more power to them. If they want to abstain from eating a certain type of food as a way of reminding themselves of their dedication to God, well, more power to them. But if you do not do that, well, more power to you, because you are simply enjoying all of the blessings that are available to you from God. Paul makes it clear that we who are in Christ don't have to abide by these laws about unclean and clean animals. But if we wish to use them as a way of reminding us to be dedicated to God, even in that which we eat, well, more power to you. But no one should hold whether or not they do or do not abide by these guidelines against anyone, right? You should not hold it against anyone if they do or do not, as long as they are not trying to justify themselves through it, because, like Paul said, no one is justified by works of the law. All right, so having said that, we are going to look at these laws about clean and unclean animals. They're divided into their, what we could probably call cosmological domains. And by cosmological, I don't mean like outer space, the cosmos, but I mean the way that the world is set up in ancient thought. There is the earth, the sea, and the sky. The heavens and the earth and the sea around the earth. So that is how these animals get divided. We start with animals that are on the earth, and then it moves to animals that are in the sea, and then it moves to animals that are in the sky, the birds, and then it has some sort of backtracking. They might consider them animals that kind of teeter in between domains, because there's like winged insects, so they are both on land and on the sea, that kind of thing. Sorry, not the sea, the sky, wings, right? That kind of thing. But the rule of thumb that are given for most of the categories is as follows. The land animals, if it has cloven hooves and chews the cud, it is considered clean. Why exactly those guidelines? We don't really know. There might have been some cultural taboos that we, just as modern day people, don't know about. But of course, for certain things like pigs, many people recognize that there were hygienic reasons, because pork can be very dangerous to eat if it's not cooked properly. So that could be a factor. However, it could also be some kind of cultural taboo that we don't know about, or perhaps they were heavily involved in pagan practices. We just don't really know. We're too far separated from the culture at the time. Then for water animals, it is that if it has fins and scales, it was considered clean. It was okay to eat. So the Jews could eat fish, but they could not eat shrimp. You know, shrimp don't have scales. They have like an exoskeleton. So crustaceans, shellfish, the Jewish people couldn't eat those. Birds, no actual hard rules are given for birds, just a list, right? Some observe that most of the birds on the list are carrion eaters, meaning they eat meat, or they have some sort of hybrid domains or natures. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the list. We have eagles, vultures, hawks, falcons, ravens, owls, and gulls, like seagulls. They are all carrion eaters. They all eat meat. Then we have an ostrich. It can't fly, even though it has wings, and so it's considered as living on the line between the cosmological domains of the earth, because it only runs around, and the sky, because it is a bird, and it has wings, but it can't fly. So it is a hybrid domain. The stork and the heron live mostly in the water. So again, it's a hybrid domain because they live in the water, right? However, they are also birds, so they also live in the heavens. So they're a hybrid domain, and that's what most people observe about them, making them unclean. And then we have a bat. A bat, of course, there's always the discussion, when was the bat made during creation? Was it made on day 5, along with all of the other creatures that fly, or was it made on day 6 with all of the land animals? Because a bat does have wings, but a bat is also a mammal. It has fur, and most of the land animals that you observe have fur, right? However, the bat also has wings like a bird. So it's a sort of hybrid nature kind of animal, and it is considered unclean. These are only guesses of what is going on. In the end, for the birds, it's just a list that we're given. We're not given the rules. For insects, clean and unclean insects, if it has wings and it crawls around, it is considered unclean. So a beetle, Israelites can't eat beetles. There are some cultures that eat things like scorpions. They eat things like, they eat crickets, but the Israelites can actually eat crickets. There are some cultures that eat insects. Most of the insects are considered unclean under the law of Moses, except for the ones that have wings and they have jumping legs. That's what I'm going to call them, jumping legs. The Bible specifies in Leviticus 21 or 11:21 that they can eat flying insects that have jointed legs above their feet, with which they leap upon the earth. So crickets, grasshoppers, locusts, they can eat those. And you remember in the New Testament, we call him John the Baptist, but I really don't like calling him John the Baptist because that makes people think of the Baptist Church. So John the Baptizer, or John the Immerser, he was living in the wilderness with a coat of camel hair and a leather belt, and he ate locusts and wild honey. He ate locusts and wild honey, the book of John points out. So eating locusts was considered clean, but eating any other insect that had wings and yet crawled around on the ground was considered unclean. And then we have swarming things. No general rule is given, just a list again. But generally anything that swarms in a big mess of creatures is considered unclean. So things like moles, rats, lizards, those kind of things, they're considered unclean because they swarm on the ground. And this might also have a connection to why some of the birds were considered unclean, that they are of a hybrid domain. Because if you remember in Genesis chapter 1 on day 5, the word used for the things that live in the water, in the sea, is actually the phrase, things which swarm. Things which swarm. So it seems like literature-wise, the only things that are allowed to swarm are supposed to be in the sea. And here we have land animals that swarm. So perhaps that is what is going on. Things that live on the land and not the sea, and yet they still swarm like sea creatures, they're no good. Maybe. Of course, we have to remember that there were also hygienic reasons to many of these. Like I said, the pig, eating raw pig is very dangerous. You will almost certainly get sick if the pork is undercooked. That actually happened to me one time. There was some Easter ham, and the bottom portion of it wasn't cooked all the way, and I ate it, and I got sick, I threw up, and now I have a taste aversion to ham. But anyway, there are hygienic reasons, but there are also symbolic reasons. And that's what we're going to observe with most of the laws, like we mentioned back in Exodus when we first started talking about the law, that there are practical reasons for most of the laws, but then there are also symbolic reasons, right? Symbolic reasons. And that is going to play into our discussion of the next chapter as well. So, Israelites were not to eat or touch an unclean animal or an animal that died of natural causes. That is in verse 24 and 23. Any animal that is found dead, you are not to eat it, you are not to touch it. Why? Well, the principle behind it is that, well, some of it is unclear, like we said, but we can understand this. Predators and scavengers were off limits, it seems. Predators and scavengers, animals that ate meat or ate dead things, they were off limits. That's not to say they were the only ones off limits, because, lizards are not, well, I guess they are kind of predators, they eat bugs. But herons are predators too. Wow, I'm having... Pigs! Pigs are not predators, there we go. Pigs are not predators, nor are they particularly scavengers, but they're still off limits. So it's not that predators and scavengers are the only animals off limits, but generally they were. Probably because of their connection with death, right? Predators and scavengers, they eat dead things. I mean, snakes kill their prey before they eat them too. So yeah, dead things. Already dead animals were off limits as well because of the same reason. It's a symbolic reason. Other kinds of animals probably had some social taboo or pagan practice associated with them that we just don't know about. Also, animal-borne diseases could be a factor as well. But the main symbolic reason that we know of is that a lot of these animals were connected with death. And as you read in Genesis 1 through 3, the only reason that death exists in the world is because of humanity's rebellion and the sin that gave birth to. Death didn't exist originally, as Genesis lays it out, at least not for humans, and so anything that is associated with death, and thus is associated with sin, does not belong in the presence of the holy God, because he didn't make the world like that. And thus, that is a corruption of the original nature of the world, so it doesn't belong in his presence. Now note, we mentioned this at the beginning of our discussion of Leviticus, and we'll mention it again now, and we will mention it again tomorrow, or next week. Becoming unclean was not a serious issue. It was not considered a sin to become unclean because you happened to touch a dead animal. You simply had to wash yourself and quarantine for the prescribed amount of time, and then you got to come right back into the community and nothing was wrong. All right? Becoming unclean ceremonially, it was not an issue. What was an issue is being in a state of uncleanness and coming into the presence of the holy God, where such a thing does not belong. That is what is highly inappropriate. That is what endangers the person's life. So we come to Leviticus chapter 12, and it's a very curious one. It's a short chapter, but it's one that raises some questions. And that is laws concerning childbirth. In short, women who gave birth to children were required to quarantine after birth. I should put a space in between after and birth, so it doesn't sound like I'm saying after birth. They were to quarantine after giving birth, and then they were also to continue in the purification process until they were no longer considered unclean. Sounds pretty reasonable, you know. The week or 2 weeks after a woman gives birth is a very precarious time, health-wise. A lot of things can go wrong. A week to 2 weeks after a child is born is also very precarious health-wise. A lot of things can go wrong. Immediately following birth is one of the most precarious times, health-wise, for both the child and the mother. So it is good that they have a time where they are away from anything and everything that can cause them to get sick. Especially in the ancient world, where if you got sick, it's really up in the air as to whether you're going to survive, right? But here's where the questions come in, okay? Leviticus chapter 12 mentions that if the woman gives birth to a boy, she is to be quarantined for 1 week. And then on the 8th day, they bring the boy to the priest, and the priest circumcises him, and they present him before God, you know, as a new member of the covenant between God and the Israelites. And that makes sense, you know, you have the 1 week, and then you have the circumcision. The circumcision has to happen on the 8th day, so you have to come out of the quarantine. But then, it says that if the child is a girl, if the child is a female, the mother must be quarantined, remain secluded, and away from all of the holy things in the sanctuary for 2 weeks. Not 1 week, but 2 weeks. And the question is, why was it twice as long for a girl? And then when you can consider the purification process that had to take place afterwards, the Bible says that if the child is a boy, the mother must continue in the purification process for 33 days. But if the child is a girl, the mother continues in the purification process for 66 days, twice as long. So people ask, why twice as long for a girl than a boy? And it leads some people to believe that the Bible is just misogynist. I actually saw a post online where someone referenced this in Leviticus chapter 12, saying that the law of Moses required women to be quarantined, or they were considered unclean, is how the Bible phrases it, and it is how that post on the internet phrased it, for twice as long than if they gave birth to a boy. In the case of they gave birth to a girl, and they claimed that the Bible was misogynist because of this. Is it actually? Short answer is no. There are several factors that feed into this regulation about quarantining after childbirth. In fact, there are three main factors. One, like I said before, is a hygienic reason. Immediately following the birth of a child is the most precarious time in the child and the mother's life. Right? When you give birth, your body is weak. It is weak. Giving birth is a strenuous process. I've never done it personally, but I know that it is an extremely strenuous process and it will leave you ragged, right? Giving birth is going to leave the body weak and susceptible to disease, sickness. When a child has just been born, they are equally as endangered by disease and illness. And so, to have them secluded and not exposed to the diseases that just exist within a human community, that's a very good thing. Thus, time was given for both of the people, in this instance, the child and the mother, to develop, for the child, and recover, for the mother, their immune systems. But every male had to be circumcised on the 8th day. Now people have come to understand that on the 8th day is the first day generally where blood is able to coagulate. So they circumcise the child on the 8th day because that is the first day that it will actually work and the child won't bleed out and die, right? So that's an interesting thing to know. However, there's also a symbolic reason to the 8th day, and that is God made the world over 6 days, rested on the 7th, and then the 8th day is what? The first day after the creation week. It's the first day of the world just being the world, right? So it is the first day for this male child to just be the male that is going to be in the Jewish nation for the rest of his life. So it is the first day of them just being normal them, now that they have been circumcised. So there is a symbolic reason also why the 8th day is the day that they were circumcised. So quarantine had to be cut, for male children, had to be cut, no pun intended, on the 8th day. However, females did not have to be circumcised. So their respite period didn't have to be cut. It didn't have to be cut short like the males. They could have a longer one, and so they got 2 weeks. That's a hygienic reason for it. But number two reason is symbolism. Nearly all of the cleanliness laws, like we said before, centered around the ideas of things related to death being unclean. In ancient thought, anything coming out of your body is you losing some of your life essence, you could call it. Some of your life comes out whenever something comes out of your body. This is why someone is rendered unclean if they have a discharge of anything. Under the law of Moses, if you had a runny nose, you are considered unclean because you have some discharge, something coming out of your body, out of your nose, and that's part of your life essence, and you're losing it. So it is a little form of death. It's related to death in ancient thought. Or if you were to touch any discharge or human waste, you were rendered unclean as well. Why? Because it is something coming out of a human body. It is considered their life essence being expelled out of them. It's a little gross to think about all the things that constitutes, but it is the symbolic thought process of the ancient world, much of the ancient world. There are parts of the world that didn't think this way. But essentially most or all of the ancient Near Eastern world, which is where the Israelites are and have come from. So, with that in mind, consider this. Women, this is not meaning to be in a misogynist way, but women are connected to the two of the biggest forms of discharging life essence, discharging something out of their body. One, they literally discharge blood out of their body on a monthly basis for most of their life. Right? That is a regular occurrence. And two, they feed their life essence into a developing human within their own body, and then when it comes time that human is ready to come out into the world, he or she is pushed out of the woman's body, literally expelling a human life out of their body. It doesn't get bigger than that. It doesn't, so women are connected to the two of the biggest forms of discharging life essence out of their body. One being a monthly regular occurrence, and two being the most connected to expelling life out of your body that you can get. This all sounds really weird to us because we are modern Westerners and we don't think this way about things like a runny nose or waste or giving birth or the menstrual cycle, but this is how the ancient people thought of it. If you expelled something from your body, it is your life essence being expelled, and therefore you are unclean when it happens to you or if you touch such a discharge. So that may be a symbolic reason why the quarantining and the purification process is twice as long if the child is a girl, because you not only have the mother, who is obviously a woman, right? She's a female, but you also have the child, who is also a female. And number three, I almost called it two. Three is an idea of numerology. Numbers are significant in the Bible. So real quick, take the 7 days of the sort of quarantine for a male child and add that to the 33 days of the purification process afterwards. How many days do you get? It's real easy math. It's 40. Remember the number 40? Remember what it means in the Bible? It is symbolic of transitional periods or testing periods, transitional between two distinct time frames. Epochs is what some people use, and a testing period is also a common way of the Bible using the number 40. So we have the 40 days and nights of which it rained upon the earth during the flood. We have the 40 years that Samuel served as the judge over Israel, transitioning between the time of the judges and the time of the kings. Also, the first 3 kings of Israel they reign for 40 years, Saul, David, and Solomon. And we have we have 40 days in which Jesus is fasting out in the wilderness before the devil comes to tempt him in Matthew chapter 4. And we have the 40 days that come in between Jesus' ascension back into heaven after his resurrection and the day of Pentecost when the church begins, right? It's a transitional period. And so 40 days or 40 weeks or 40 years, very important number in the Bible, symbolic for transition. Now, take the 14 days for the female child's quarantine, and then add the 66 days for the purification process. You get 80. 80 is simply 4 times 2, right? So it still has the connection to a transition or testing period, probably transitional period, because it's the transitional period between the child's birth and them being sort of fully inducted into the community, right? It's a transition period between them not being a part of Israel yet and then them being a full part of Israel once they are 40/40 times 2 days old. Again, also, being unclean, consider this, being unclean is not itself a sin, right? So it's not the woman's fault that she is rendered unclean because she has a baby, okay? And thus, it is no more her fault if she is rendered unclean for twice as long because she has a female baby. It's not a problem, it's not a sin, it's not considered wrong, so no, it's not misogynist. The Bible is not misogynist. In fact, the Bible makes lots of... I'm trying to figure out a way to say it that doesn't sound offensive or pandering at all. But it gives a lot of credit to women, and it makes a lot of it gives a lot of protections for women in society. In the Old Testament, women were given far more protection than in other ancient societies, and in the Old Testament, women were given far more credit than other ancient societies. And in the church, women are given special place of being, really the backbone. The elders and the deacons are all men, and they form sort of the hands and the feet and the ones that hold authority to make calls of decision, judgment calls. But the women of the church are generally portrayed as the ones who are the backbone of the church. Raising godly children, that is a big role of women. Older women teaching younger women to love and respect their husbands and to be gentle and kind and humble and strong in their own way. That is a big thing that women get credit for in the New Testament in the church. So it's not that the Bible is ever misogynist. Human society is often misogynist in various ways, but when you read the Bible, it's not. It's not misogynist. It gives great credit. It's really revolutionary in a way for its time, and that's something that we need to keep in mind whenever we read something in the Bible about women. Because whenever you encounter an ancient text talking about the roles of women, everybody's go-to reaction is to say, oh, I bet this is going to be misogynist. Well, understanding the deeper context of what it's saying, you'll realize that it is very much not misogynist. All right, that is it for this evening. Thank you again for tuning in. watching this, Catherine and I are actually in Florida for Thanksgiving. This is a pre-recorded video. And I hope that everybody has a great Thanksgiving day. Hopefully you can spend it with family or friends. And remember to take the time to pay special mind to all the things that God has done for us and given us, for which we can be thankful for. Thank you again. God bless you all, and good night.